Hi guys, today is Saturday, March 21st, 2020, and this is video 5 in our Skill a Day series. And today we are going to be focusing on our sourdough starter that we began all the way back at day 1. Now after 5 days of feeding and babying a sourdough starter, you finally get to use it. You actually don't have to though. If you are looking for a stronger flavor, what you can do is continue to feed it daily, but you still will discard half of the starter that you have. Instead of discarding it, today we're actually going to use it to make a loaf of sourdough bread. Now, the recipe that I have chosen today is a rustic sourdough loaf from King Arthur Flour. You can find the recipe online. But first I'm just going to go through the steps of what it looks like to deal with your sourdough on day 5. So we're going to divide it in half. By day 5, your sourdough should be very elastic, okay? It should be bubbly across the top. It should smell sour. You should recognize the aroma as actual sourdough that you would cut into fresh from a bakery. So I made a little line to show where about half of my sourdough is. Our recipe today calls for 1 cup of sourdough starter. I've already measured out 5 cups of all-purpose flour in this bowl. That's going to be what we need to make our sourdough loaf. However, I still have probably an additional cup of sourdough starter that I need to remove out of my big pot of starter. You can choose what you're going to do with that. You can just discard it. Some people choose to dry it so that they always have some sourdough starter on hand that you can revive if you would decide you want to take a break from feeding a sourdough. Or there's lots of recipes online that you can look at for things like sourdough pancakes, sourdough muffins, bagels, bread, buns, all sorts of sourdough things that you can do. But the point is here that we are dividing our starter by half. And then we are going to do what we do every day and feed it with 4 ounces of flour and 4 ounces of water. The purpose of discarding half is to not have it continually get bigger and bigger and bigger until you have so much sourdough you don't even know what to do with it. We're not bulking it up anymore, we're just maintaining it. At this point, if you're not planning on baking regularly with this, some people make a lovely sourdough every couple of days, and if that's what you want to do, you'll want to leave it out on the counter and daily discard half and continue to feed it. If you need to bulk it up, then you just don't discard. But if you're not planning on baking regularly, what you would do at this point is you can put it in a sealed tight container and put it in your fridge. If it stays in your fridge, you still need to feed it about every week. If you notice that it's separating into a layer of liquid on top, that's a sign that it's getting hungry. You need to feed it then, okay? And then if you want to use it, you would just pull it out, do 1 day of feeding, and it will revive itself and be ripe and ready for you to go. Okay, as I mentioned before, you can also lay it flat on a sheet and dry it out, and then just store that in an airtight jar. And then when you are ready to use that, you just, wow, words are really hard sometimes. Then you rehydrate it. There we go. And you can use that within a day. So our sourdough starter now is back to looking like a stringy, stretchy dough. Very elastic. The bubbles are all gone, but remember they're going to come back. Okay, the essence of the sourdough is here. It's complete. It's still sour. Even though we fed it tomorrow, it would be ready to go again if you wanted to. So we're going to set this aside. Remember to cover it loosely. Keep it on your counter if you intend to use it again regularly. But if not, if you're looking for ways to use it up, this is going to be our bread. Now, one of the wonderful things about sourdough is remember that it's cultivating wild yeast, right? So it is extracting naturally occurring yeast and utilizing that, which means technically you don't need to use additional yeast in a sourdough recipe. That's especially good if you live in a place where all of a sudden everyone has decided to become home baker and all of the stores are sold out of yeast. I buy mine in commercial amounts, so I don't really ever run out of yeast. But this recipe today, because it's just our first one, we're actually going to supplement with a little bit of yeast. Okay, the recipe calls for instant yeast. I didn't have that, so I just proofed some of mine. So I've got here 1.5 cups of lukewarm water with 1 to 2 teaspoons of yeast, depending on how good you think your sourdough is going to do. Okay, it does have its own yeast. It will cause rising on its own, but if you think that your bread needs a little bit more help, maybe go closer to the 2 teaspoons amount. Okay. If you don't have any yeast on hand, you can find other recipes online that just call for sourdough starter. You can give your sourdough starter an extra day or 2 of feeding so that you can make sure that it's really good and ready to go. But I think that ours should be good for today. Okay. So I'm just going to pour this in. This recipe is just a really basic, easy to follow one. It calls for 2.5 teaspoons of salt. And over there. Now, because again, I live in the prairies, I went a little bit under on my measurements for dry ingredients and a little bit over on my measurement for water, just to make sure that it was moist enough. Just gauge that based on the humidity where you are. So all we're going to do, we've got our flour, our starter, our water, yeast, and salt in here. Now we're just going to mix it up with a dough hook on your mixer, and then we're going to roll it into a ball, put it in a little bit of oil in our pot here, and cover it up loosely so that we'll let it rise for an hour or 2 until it's double the size in bulk. And then we will come back and make it into loaves. All right, we're back. We've let our sourdough bread rise in our bowl for 1 to 2 hours until it's double the size. And now we're going to shape it into loaves. So we're actually going to get 2 loaves out of this dough. You just want to pour it out onto a lightly floured surface. And we're just going to cut it right in half. If it's a little bit sticky on your blade, just get a little bit of flour on there. It'll go right through nice and easy. You should be able to smell the sourness of it. It smells delicious. Now all we're going to do is just deflating a little bit. All we're going to do is just tuck it into a loaf. And you can make it long, you can make it short, you can make it a little rounder if you like, whatever shape you prefer to serve. So I think I'm going to do one longer and one rounder. All right, now all we're going to do, we've got to let this rest and rise up again for about another hour. So you're going to set it on a sheet with a parchment paper or a non-stick pad down. We're just going to drape a towel over it and let it rise up again for 1 more hour, and then we'll come back and finish that. Hi guys, we're back for the last part of our video here. So we have let our sourdough loaves rise, and now what we're going to do is you're going to spritz them with some warm water. What this is going to do is help keep the crust kind of like a chewy, spreadable thing so that it's not cracking open all over the top. Okay? You're going to take a sharp knife and you're going to cut gouges into it. This is going to give the crust room so that the dough can expand without trying to break out all over the place. All right, if you want, you can also dust them with flour. I'm not going to do that myself. And we're going to throw these into a preheated 425 degree oven for 25 to 30 minutes until they're nice and golden and they sound hollow when you tap them. I have behind me the rest of my discard off of my sourdough starter for today. I laid it out on a parchment paper and just spread it out as thin as I could. I'm going to let it sit out for a day or 2, maybe 3, depending on how much time it needs to dry, until it's brittle and you can crack it. And I'm going to put it in a jar and store it in my pantry so that I can do sourdough again sometime down the road without having to worry about doing a 5-day starter process. All right, so I'm going to bake my bread. I hope that you had fun following along, and I will see you again for another Skill a Day series.